Lieutenant Minho wiped his sweaty palms on his uniform as he watched the massive Valarian ships dock at Luna Station. After months of radio communications, this was it. Humanity's first face-to-face meeting with an alien civilization. The weight of representing his entire species pressed down on his shoulders like a heavy blanket. The Valarian delegation emerged from their ship with an elegance that made Minho feel clumsy in comparison. They were tall, graceful beings with silvery skin that seemed to shimmer under the station's lights. Their leader, Princess Arya, moved with the fluid grace of someone born to royalty. Her large, luminescent eyes studied the human delegation with what appeared to be curiosity mixed with caution. "Remember, just follow the cultural briefing," Commander Jiwon whispered beside him. "Accept any gifts graciously, bow respectfully, and keep your hands visible at all times." The ceremony began in the station's main docking bay, hastily decorated with both Earth and Valerian flags. Translators worked frantically to ensure every word was properly conveyed between the two species. Princess Arya stepped forward, her flowing robes catching the light as she moved. In her delicate hands, she held an intricate pendant that seemed to pulse with its own inner light. The translator's voice echoed through the bay as Princess Arya spoke in her melodious language. "The princess offers this token of respect and hopes for peaceful relations between our peoples." Minho stepped forward, his heart hammering against his ribs. This was the moment that would define humanity's future among the stars. He reached out and accepted the beautiful pendant, feeling its warm surface against his palm. The craftsmanship was incredible, tiny crystalline structures that seemed to contain swirling galaxies within them. "Thank you, Your Highness," Minho said, bowing deeply as he had been instructed. "Humanity accepts this gift with gratitude and looks forward to building a lasting friendship." The moment his fingers closed around the pendant, something changed in the room. The Valerian delegates gasped audibly, their translator devices crackling with rapid, urgent speech. Princess Arya's eyes widened to an almost comical degree, her hand flying to cover her mouth in what was clearly shock. "What's happening, Commander?" Jiwon hissed, but the translator was too busy trying to keep up with the explosion of Valarian chatter to respond. The silence that followed was deafening. Every Valarian in the room stared at Minho as if he had just grown a second head. Princess Arya looked like she might faint, her silvery complexion turning an alarming shade of pale blue. Finally, the lead translator cleared his throat nervously. His voice shook as he spoke. "There appears to have been a cultural misunderstanding. In Valerian tradition, the acceptance of a royal pendant in this manner constitutes a formal proposal of marriage." The words hit the human delegation like a meteor strike. Minho felt the pendant suddenly become incredibly heavy in his hand. Around him, his fellow diplomats began whispering frantically among themselves. Someone behind him muttered something. That sounded suspiciously like a curse word. Princess Arya finally found her voice, speaking in heavily accented English that bypassed the translators entirely. "So you are taking me as your life partner?" Her voice carried a mixture of disbelief and something that might have been panic. "You could not believe my words when I offered this?" Minho opened his mouth to explain, to somehow fix this cosmic level misunderstanding, but no words came out. He looked down at the pendant in his hands, then back at the princess, then at his own team, who were all staring at him with expressions ranging from horror to barely contained hysteria. The diplomatic mission that was supposed to secure humanity's place in the galaxy had just accidentally arranged an interstellar marriage, and Minho was pretty sure this wasn't covered in any of his training manuals. The conference room on Luna Station had never felt smaller. Minho sat across from Princess Arya, the cursed pendant still clutched in his sweaty palm, while translators worked overtime to explain just how badly he had messed up. The princess kept glancing at him, with an expression that mixed embarrassment with something that looked almost like pity. "Let me understand this correctly," Commander Jiwon said slowly, rubbing his temples like he was fighting the mother of all headaches. "There's no way to undo this?" Princess Arya shook her head, her silvery hair catching the harsh station lights. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of someone delivering a death sentence. "In our culture, the royal bonding ceremony is Sacred. To reject it after acceptance would bring dishonor to both our houses. My father, the Emperor, would consider it an insult to our entire civilization. The lead translator, a nervous man named Dr. Kim, cleared his throat. Your Highness, surely there must be some precedent, some way to explain that this was a misunderstanding. Misunderstanding or not, Princess Arya replied, the pendant has been accepted. In the eyes of my people, Lieutenant Minho has declared his intention to become my life partner. To reverse this now, she paused, choosing her words carefully. It could be seen as an act of war. Minho felt like someone had just punched him in the stomach. War? Over a wedding mix-up? You must understand, Princess Arya explained, leaning forward earnestly. Honor is everything in Velaryon society. For a member of the royal family to be rejected after offering the bonding pendant would suggest that we are not worthy of respect. My father has destroyed entire star systems for lesser insults. Commander Jiwon was already on his communicator, frantically trying to reach Earth's leadership. His voice carried across the room in urgent whispers. Yes, sir, you heard correctly. Marriage. No, sir, I'm not joking. We need instructions immediately. Meanwhile, through the station's viewports, Minho could see Velaryon ships arriving by the dozen. What had started as a small diplomatic fleet was rapidly becoming an armada. The message was clear. They were taking this very seriously. There is one possibility, Princess Arya said quietly, drawing everyone's attention back to her. According to our ancient laws, if the proposed partner can prove their worthiness through the traditional trials, the bonding can proceed with honor intact. And if he fails? Dr. Kim asked, though from his expression, he already knew he wouldn't like the answer. Then he will be deemed unworthy, and the insult to our house will be complete. Princess Arya's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. The consequences would be severe. Minho swallowed hard. What exactly do these trials involve? Princess Arya looked uncomfortable. They were designed for Velaryon physiology and capabilities. The trial of mind tests intellectual capacity far beyond what most beings possess. The trial of valor requires physical prowess and combat skills that... She gestured helplessly at Minho's very human form. And the trial of heart demands moral courage that few can demonstrate. Great, Minho muttered. So I have to be smarter, stronger, and braver than an advanced alien species. No pressure. From across the room, Commander Jiwon's conversation with Earth was getting heated. No, sir, we cannot just apologize and leave. They have 40 warships surrounding the station. Dr. Kim was frantically scrolling through his cultural databases. There must be something here about trial preparations, some way to give you an advantage. Princess Arya studied Minho with an expression he couldn't quite read. I should tell you, she said softly, no off-worlder has ever attempted these trials. They are considered impossible for anyone not born to Velaryon nobility. So, you're saying I'm going to fail? Minho asked, surprised by how calm he sounded given that his failure might start an interstellar war. I'm saying, Princess Arya replied, that you will be attempting something that has never been done before. The Velaryon court is already debating whether a human could possibly possess the qualities worthy of royal marriage. Many believe this entire situation is beneath their consideration. Minho looked around the room at the panicked faces of his fellow humans, then back at Princess Arya. Somewhere behind her composed exterior, he thought he detected something that might have been hope. Whether she was hoping he would succeed or fail, he couldn't tell. When do we start? He asked. The emergency session in Earth's Global Council chamber was anything but calm. President Martinez slammed his hand on the podium, his face red with frustration. Are you telling me that one? Lieutenant's handshake might start a galactic war. It wasn't a handshake, sir, Director Chang replied through the video link from Luna Station. It was accepting what amounts to an engagement ring from an alien princess. Half the council erupted in angry voices, while the other half sat in stunned silence. Senator Williams stood up, his voice cutting through the chaos. This could be the opportunity of a lifetime. Think about it. A direct marriage alliance with an advanced civilization could secure humanity's future among the stars. Or it could make us look like bumbling idiots who can't handle basic diplomacy, Admiral Foster shot back. What happens when other alien species see that we accidentally married into the first royal family we met? Back on Lunar Station, Minho was having his own crisis. He sat in his small quarters, staring at the Valarian pendant that had started this whole mess. 3 days until the trials began, and he felt about as prepared as someone facing a hurricane with an umbrella. A soft knock at his door interrupted his brooding. Princess Arya stood in the hallway, looking nervous. "May I come in? I thought perhaps we should talk." Minho gestured her inside, noticing how she moved with careful grace even in the cramped human quarters. "If you're here to tell me more about how impossible these trials are, I'm not sure I want to hear it." "Actually," she said, settling into the single chair with surprising informality, "I came to help you prepare, but this conversation must remain between us." Something in her tone made Minho pay attention. "Why the secrecy?" Princess Arya glanced toward the door, then leaned forward. "Because what I'm about to tell you would be considered treason by some members of my court." She paused, seeming to gather courage. "The trials were designed centuries ago, when our society was different. More flexible, more like yours in some ways." "What do you mean?" "Valarians today are taught from birth to follow strict patterns of thinking and behavior. We have protocols for everything, hierarchies that cannot be questioned, and traditions that must be observed without deviation." Her voice carried a hint of frustration that surprised Minho. "But humans, you adapt. You find new solutions to old problems. You feel emotions deeply and use them to make decisions." Minho frowned. "That doesn't sound like advantages for your trials." "That's where you're wrong," Princess Arya said, her eyes lighting up with something that looked like excitement. "The trials weren't designed to test rigid thinking or blind obedience. They were created to find partners worthy of guiding our people through difficult times. They test for flexibility, creativity, and emotional strength. And you think humans have those qualities?" Princess Arya smiled for the first time since Minho had met her. "I've been studying your species since we first made contact. Your history is full of impossible victories achieved through unconventional thinking. You've survived ice ages, plagues, wars, and disasters that would have destroyed most civilizations. And you did it not through superior technology or physical strength, but through adaptation and cooperation." Meanwhile, Earth's political crisis was deepening. General Park burst into the council chamber with urgent news. "The Valarians have sent additional ships. Our satellites count over 200 vessels now surrounding Lunar Station." "This is madness," Senator Kim declared. "We're talking about sacrificing one man to appease aliens we barely understand. We're talking about preventing a war that could wipe out humanity," President Martinez replied grimly. Lieutenant Minho volunteered for this mission knowing the risks. Back in his quarters, Minho was beginning to understand something that the politicians on Earth couldn't see. "You're not just helping me prepare for the trials, are you?" he asked Princess Arya. "You're hoping I'll succeed for reasons that have nothing to do with preventing war." Princess Arya's formal composure cracked slightly. "Many of my people are tired of our rigid ways. We've become so focused on maintaining tradition that we've forgotten how to grow, how to change, how to truly live. When I watch humans, I see the vitality that my people have lost. So if I somehow pass these trials, you would prove that different doesn't mean inferior. That strength comes in many forms. That maybe, just maybe, our two species could learn from each other, instead of one simply dominating the other." Minho looked at the pendant again, but this time it didn't feel like a burden. "No pressure though, right?" Princess Arya laughed, a sound like silver bells that made Minho realize that despite everything, he was starting to genuinely like this alien princess who had accidentally become his fiancée. "None at all," she said with a grin that was surprisingly human in its mischief. The grand hall of the Valarian flagship felt like a cathedral made of light and crystal. Minho stood at the center, surrounded by towering alien intellectuals whose eyes glowed with an inner radiance that made him feel like a candle trying to compete with spotlights. The trial of intellect was about to begin, and every part of his human brain screamed that he was about to embarrass his entire species. High Judge Vextar, a particularly imposing Valarian with intricate geometric patterns etched into his silver skin, gestured to a floating holographic display. The first challenge, his voice resonated through the chamber, involves calculating the optimal trajectory for a fleet of 10,000 ships through a collapsing star system while accounting for gravitational anomalies, solar flares, and temporal distortions. Minho stared at the swirling mess of numbers, equations, and three-dimensional models that appeared in the air around him. The mathematics were so advanced that he couldn't even pronounce half the symbols, let alone understand what they meant. Around him, the Valarian judges whispered among themselves in tones that didn't sound particularly encouraging. "So you may begin," Judge Vextar announced. For several minutes, Minho just stood there watching the impossible equations dance in front of his eyes. He could feel sweat beading on his forehead as panic started to set in. This was exactly what everyone had feared. A human trying to match intellects with beings who had been solving problems like this for centuries. Then, something Princess Arya had said came back to him. You adapt. You find new solutions to old problems. Minho stopped, trying to understand the mathematics, and started looking at the problem differently. Instead of seeing equations, he began seeing patterns. Instead of focusing on the numbers, he focused on what they represented. "I need to ask a question," Minho said suddenly, interrupting the judge's whispered conversations. Judge Vextar looked surprised. "This is highly irregular. The trial does not permit assistance." "I'm not asking for help with the math," Minho replied, his confidence growing. "I'm asking about the situation. Are these ships trying to evacuate people from the collapsing system?" The judges exchanged glances. "That is correct. But how does this change the mathematical requirements?" "It changes everything," Minho said, walking closer to the holographic display. "You're treating this like a pure navigation problem, but it's actually a rescue mission. The optimal solution isn't the one with the most elegant mathematics. It's the one that saves the most lives." Without waiting for permission, Minho began manipulating the display with hand gestures he'd seen the Valarians use. Instead of trying to calculate the perfect trajectory for all 10,000 ships, he started grouping them differently. He sent the fastest ships ahead to scout safe routes, used the larger vessels to shield smaller ones from solar flares, and created a chain of communication relays that could adapt to changing conditions in real time. "This is completely illogical," one of the younger judges protested. "You're ignoring fundamental principles of astrogation." "I'm ignoring your fundamental principles," Minho corrected, "because they're designed for perfect conditions. But this isn't perfect. It's an emergency. In emergencies, you don't have time for perfect solutions. You need solutions that work." His final proposal looked nothing like what the Valarians expected. Instead of one massive, precisely calculated formation, he created a flexible network of smaller groups that could respond independently to threats while maintaining overall coordination. The mathematics were simpler, but the results were undeniably effective. The second challenge involved a philosophical puzzle about the nature of consciousness and free will. Again, the Valarians approached it with complex logical frameworks and centuries of academic tradition. Minho approached it like a human who had spent his whole life making choices and wondering if they mattered. "You're asking whether we truly choose our actions, or if we're just following predetermined patterns," he said after listening to their elaborate philosophical constructs. "But you're missing the point. It doesn't matter if free will is real or an illusion. We still have to act as if our choices matter, because if we don't, then nothing we do has any meaning." The silence that followed was different from the uncomfortable. Quiet after his first answer. This time several judges were nodding thoughtfully. The third and final intellectual challenge was the most complex yet, a multi-dimensional logic puzzle that required processing thousands of variables simultaneously. Minho took one look at it and laughed, earning shocked gasps from the assembled Valarians. "I can't solve this the way you want me to," he admitted. "My brain doesn't work like yours, but I can solve it the human way." Instead of trying to process all the variables at once, Minho began eliminating impossible solutions, using educated guesses and gut instinct to narrow down the options. He made assumptions, tested them quickly, and adjusted when they proved wrong. It was messy, imperfect, and completely contrary to Valerian methodology. It was also faster than anything the judges had ever seen. When the trial ended, Judge Vextar approached Minho with an expression that might have been respect. "Your methods are unorthodox, but your results are undeniably effective. You have passed the trial of intellect, though not in any way we expected." As Minho left the hall, he could hear the judges beginning to debate among themselves about the nature of intelligence and whether their traditional methods might not be the only valid approach to problem-solving. Princess Arya was waiting for him in the corridor, her eyes bright with something that looked like pride. "One down," she whispered. "Two to go." The combat arena aboard the Valarian flagship looked like something from a gladiator movie, except instead of sand and stone, everything was made of gleaming metal and pulsing energy fields. Minho stood at one end, wearing basic protective gear. That felt inadequate against what he was about to face. At the other end, Champion Kael'thon waited with the patience of a predator, his 7-foot frame covered in ceremonial armor that probably cost more than Minho's entire military salary. General Vosika, the head of the Valerian military caste, announced the rules from an elevated platform. "The trial of valor tests warrior spirit and combat prowess. Victory is achieved through surrender, incapacitation, or tactical superiority. Lethal force is prohibited, but all other methods are acceptable." Minho looked around the arena, noting the various obstacles, energy barriers, and weapon racks scattered throughout. Everything was designed for Valerian physiology, too high, too heavy, or too complex for human use. It was like being asked to play basketball against giants while wearing ankle weights. "You may choose your weapons," Champion Kael'thon said, his voice carrying across the arena with mechanical precision. He moved to a rack of gleaming energy weapons, each one humming with barely contained power. Minho walked over to the weapon selection, pretending to examine the alien technology while actually studying the arena layout. The weapons were beautiful, but completely unfamiliar. He picked up what looked like an energy sword, nearly dropping it due to its unexpected weight. Champion Kael'thon selected a weapon that resembled a staff, but crackled with electricity at both ends. "I should warn you," the champion said with what might have been kindness. "I have been undefeated in combat for 47 years. Perhaps you would prefer to yield now with honor intact?" "Thanks for the offer," Minho replied, still looking around the arena. "But I didn't come this far to quit now." The moment the trial began, Minho realized just how outmatched he was. Champion Kael'thon moved like liquid lightning, covering the distance between them in a heartbeat. Minho barely managed to dodge the first strike, rolling behind a metal barrier, as the energy weapon carved through the air where his head had been. For the first few minutes, all Minho could do was run and hide. Every direct confrontation ended with him being thrown across the arena or barely escaping another devastating attack. The Valerian spectators began murmuring among themselves, probably wondering why they were wasting time watching such a one-sided fight. But Minho's grandfather had been a soldier, and his father had been a soldier, and both had drilled into him that sometimes the only way to win against a stronger opponent was to change the rules of the game. Instead of fighting like a Valerian warrior, he started fighting like a human guerrilla. He began using the arena's obstacles not just as cover, but as weapons. When Champion Kael'thon charged around a barrier, Minho was ready with a loose piece of debris, throwing it not at his opponent but at the energy field generator above. The resulting shower of sparks and temporary darkness gave him precious seconds to reposition. "Interesting tactics," Champion Kael'thon called out, no longer sounding quite so confident. "But hiding will not win you this trial." "I'm not hiding," Minho called back and threw another piece of metal, this time at a support beam. "I'm hunting." The arena began to work against both of them as Minho systematically damaged non-essential systems, creating smoke, sparks, and unpredictable energy discharges. He turned the clean, organized Valerian battlefield into something chaotic and unpredictable, something more suited to human adaptability than alien precision. Champion Kael'thon was forced to split his attention between hunting Minho and avoiding the environmental hazards that kept appearing around him. When he focused on attack, Minho would vanish into the smoke and sabotage another system. When he tried to restore order to the arena, Minho would strike from an unexpected angle. The psychological warfare came next. Minho started talking, using every bit of human cunning he could muster. You know what the funny thing is about being undefeated for 47 years? It means you haven't learned anything new in 47 years. Silence. Champion Kylethon's composure was beginning to crack. I bet every opponent you've faced has tried to fight you the same way. Stand up, trade blows, see who's stronger. But humans don't fight fair. We fight to survive, and we've been doing it a lot longer than you have. As the trial continued, something remarkable happened. Champion Kylethon's superior strength and speed began to matter less in the chaotic environment Minho had created. The Valerian warrior found himself constantly off balance, never quite sure where the next attack would come from or what system would fail next. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, Champion Kylethon made a mistake. Frustrated by Minho's hit-and-run tactics, he overextended during an attack, leaving himself vulnerable. Minho managed to get behind him and, using a technique he'd learned in basic training, put the much larger alien in a chokehold for B. A moment, it looked like Minho might actually win. Then Champion Kylethon's superior strength reasserted itself, and he broke free, sending Minho flying across the arena. But the damage to the champion's pride was done. For the first time in 47 years, he had been caught off guard, outmaneuvered, and nearly defeated by what his people considered a primitive opponent. The trial officially ended in a draw when both fighters were too exhausted to continue effectively. But as General Vossaker announced the results, Minho could see something new in the eyes of the Valarian military observers. It wasn't quite respect yet, but it was no longer dismissal. "You did not win," Champion Kylethon said as he helped Minho to his feet. "But you did not lose either. That is unprecedented." From the observation deck, Princess Arya watched with something that looked suspiciously like admiration, as the human who had accidentally proposed to her limped out of the arena, battered but unbroken. 2 trials down, 1 to go. The Trial of Heart took place in a chamber unlike the others Minho had seen. Instead of grand halls or combat arenas, this room felt intimate and somehow sacred. Soft light emanated from crystalline formations in the walls, and the air itself seemed to hum with ancient power. Only the most senior Valerian judges were present, their faces grave with the weight of tradition. Elder Tisara, the oldest member of the court, stepped forward. Her silver skin was marked with intricate patterns that spoke of centuries of wisdom and experience. "The Trial of Heart is not about strength of body or quickness of mind," she began, her voice carrying the authority of ages. "It tests the strength of character, the willingness to do what is right even when the cost is great." Minho nodded, though inside his stomach was churning. The previous trials had been difficult, but at least he'd known what to expect. This felt different, more personal somehow. "You will be presented with information," Elder Thisara continued, "and given a choice. How you choose will determine not only your worthiness to join our royal house, but perhaps the future relationship between our peoples." A holographic display materialized in the center of the room, showing documents, recordings, and data streams that began to tell a disturbing story. As Minho watched, he realized he was looking at evidence of massive corruption within the Valarian government. High-ranking officials had been embezzling resources meant for outer colonies, leaving entire worlds struggling with food shortages and failing infrastructure. "This information came to light during our investigation into your background, Elder," Thaisara explained. "We wanted to ensure that humanity was worthy of alliance, so we examined your recent history, your governments, your methods of operation." Minho studied the data, feeling sick as the scope of the corruption became clear. Millions of Valerian citizens were suffering while their leaders lived in luxury, and it had been going on for decades. "But in our investigation," another judge continued, "we discovered something else. These corrupt officials are the very ones who most strongly support an alliance with humanity. They see your species as potential partners in their schemes, beings they can manipulate and exploit." The trap was becoming clear, and Minho felt his heart sink as he understood what was coming next. The officials who oppose them, Elder Tissara said softly, are honest but believe humans are too primitive for meaningful alliance. They would prefer to limit contact between our species to basic trade agreements. Minho stared at the evidence, floating before him, understanding the impossible choice he was being asked to make. If he exposed the corruption, he would destroy the political faction that supported close human-Valerian relations. Earth would lose its best chance at gaining advanced technology and galactic allies. But if he remained silent, he would be allowing massive injustice to continue, letting millions of innocent Valerians suffer for the sake of human advancement. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" Minho asked, though he was afraid he already knew. "You have two paths before you," Elder Thisara replied. "You can remain silent about what you have learned, ensuring that the pro-human faction retains power and your species prospers. Or you can speak truth to power, knowing that it will likely doom any hope of meaningful alliance between our peoples." The silence in the chamber was deafening. Minho could feel the weight of Earth's expectations. On his shoulders, the hopes of billions of humans who dreamed of joining the galactic community. His own team back on Lunar Station, Commander G1, Dr. Kim, all the politicians on Earth who saw this as humanity's greatest opportunity, they were all counting on him to secure their future. But as he looked at the evidence of suffering, of children going hungry while corrupt officials lived in luxury, he thought about something his father had told him years ago. "Son, it doesn't matter what anyone else thinks of you if you can't look at yourself in the mirror." Minho took a deep breath and made his choice. "I need to report this corruption," he said firmly, "not just to your court, but to your people. They have a right to know what's being done in their name." The judges exchanged glances, some nodding while others looked troubled. Elder Thisara studied Minho with eyes that seemed to see straight through to his soul. "You understand what this means?" she asked. "The faction that supports humanity will be destroyed. Your species will be seen as troublemakers who interfere in internal affairs. The alliance you came here to build will likely never happen." "Understand," Minho replied, surprised by how calm he felt. "But I also understand that any alliance built on a foundation of corruption and injustice wouldn't be worth having. If humanity is going to have a relationship with your people, it should be an honest one." For a long moment no one spoke. Then Elder Thisara smiled, the first time Minho had seen a Valerian show genuine warmth. "In 40 years of conducting these trials," she said, "I have never seen anyone willingly sacrifice their own interests for the sake of people they had never met. You have demonstrated something we had begun to fear was lost in the galaxy. True moral courage." Another judge stepped forward. "The corruption you have chosen to expose has been troubling our court for years, but we lacked the political will to act. Your willingness to speak truth, knowing the personal cost, shames us into action." As the trial concluded, Minho realized that by choosing integrity over advantage, he might have actually secured something more valuable than any political alliance: genuine respect between two species who were learning they had more in common than they'd ever imagined. Princess Arya was waiting outside the chamber, her eyes bright with something that looked remarkably like love. The observation deck of the Valarian flagship offered a breathtaking view of the stars, but Minho found himself more interested in watching Princess Arya as she pointed out different constellations. 3 trials completed, and somehow the impossible had happened. He was actually getting married to an alien princess. More surprisingly, he was starting to realize he wanted to. "That cluster there," Arya said, her finger tracing patterns in the starfield, "is where I was born. The palace sits on a crystal mountain that catches the light of 3 different suns. Sounds beautiful," Minho replied, then hesitated. "Will I ever see it?" Arya's expression grew complicated. "That depends on many things. My father, the Emperor, is traditional. He sees this marriage as a political necessity, nothing more. The idea that it could become something real." She trailed off, uncertainty flickering across her features. They had been spending more time together between the formal ceremonies, initially to help Minho understand Valarian customs, but increasingly just because they enjoyed each other's company. What had started as awkward diplomatic necessity was slowly becoming something neither of them had expected. "Can I ask you something?" Minho said, settling onto the crystalline bench beside her. "When you offered me that pendant, what were you really thinking?" Arya laughed, a sound that still surprised him with its warmth. "Honestly, I was terrified. It was my first major diplomatic mission, and I was so focused on not making mistakes that I forgot to consider how different your customs might be from ours. So you accidentally proposed to me because you were nervous." "Incredibly nervous," she admitted. "But now—" She looked at him with an expression that made his heart skip. "Now I'm starting to think it might have been the best mistake I ever made." Their conversations had grown deeper over the past few days. Arya had begun sharing her frustrations about Valarian society, speaking with a passion that her formal diplomatic training had clearly tried to suppress. "We've become so obsessed with perfection that we've forgotten how to grow," she explained during one of their late-night talks. "Every aspect of our lives is planned, predetermined, optimized for efficiency. We know exactly what we'll be doing 50 years from now because nothing ever changes." "That doesn't sound entirely bad," Minho had replied. "Stability has its advantages." "But at what cost?" Arya's eyes had blazed with an intensity that reminded him she was born to rule. "When was the last time a Valarian created something truly new? When did we last take a risk that wasn't calculated to 17 decimal places? We've achieved perfect order by eliminating anything unpredictable, including passion, creativity, and the possibility of genuine surprise." It was during these conversations that Minho began to understand why some Valarians had started looking at their relationship as more than just a diplomatic curiosity. Word had spread through the fleet about the human who had passed the trials through unconventional thinking, who had chosen integrity over advantage, and who was somehow making their reserved princess laugh and argue and show emotions that proper Valarian nobility rarely displayed in public. Dr. Velameth, a young Valarian scientist, had approached Minho after the trial of heart with barely contained excitement. "Is it true that humans regularly change their governmental systems? That you adapt your societies based on new circumstances?" "Well, yes," Minho had replied, puzzled by the intensity of the question. "Democracy, technology, social movements, we're constantly evolving our systems as we learn new things." The young scientist's eyes had lit up like stars. "Fascinating. And this causes no instability, no collapse of social order." Similar conversations were happening throughout the fleet as progressive Valarians began questioning whether their rigid traditions were truly serving them well. Princess Arya was becoming a symbol for those who wanted change, and her relationship with Minho represented the possibility of growth, adaptation, and renewal. But not everyone was pleased with these developments. Lord Zephyran, one of the most powerful conservative nobles, had requested a private audience with Princess Arya. Minho wasn't supposed to know about it, but he'd overheard enough to understand that the conversation hadn't gone well. "He told me I was contaminating our bloodline," Arya confided to Minho afterward, her usual composure cracked with anger, "that allowing primitive genetics into the royal family would weaken future generations." "Charming guy," Minho muttered. "I take it he's not planning to attend the wedding." "He's planning something," Arya replied grimly. "Lord Zephyran doesn't just oppose changes, he destroys them, and he has more support than I'd like to admit." The conservative faction's concerns went beyond simple prejudice. They saw the growing interest in human adaptability as a threat to the social order that had kept them in power for centuries. If Valarians started questioning the wisdom of rigid traditions, where would it end? Would they begin demanding representation in government? Would they challenge the authority of the noble houses? Late one night, as Minho and Arya walked through the ship's botanical gardens, she voiced the fear that had been growing in both their minds. "What if we're moving too fast?" she asked. "What if forcing this change through marriage creates more problems than it solves?" Minho stopped walking and took her hands in his. "Are you having second thoughts about marrying a human?" "I'm having second thoughts about what our marriage might cost my people," she replied. "And yours?" Looking into her luminous eyes, Minho realized that somewhere between the trials and the political maneuvering, something real had grown between them. This wasn't just about preventing war or securing alliances anymore. This was about two people from different worlds who had found something worth fighting for. "Then we make sure the cost is worth it," he said simply. The wedding ceremony was scheduled for dawn, when the light of 3 distant stars would align perfectly with the Velaryon fleet's position. But at midnight, Princess Arya burst into Minho's quarters with terror written across her face and a datapad clutched in her trembling hands. "We have to leave. Now," she whispered urgently, glancing over her shoulder at the empty corridor. "They're going to kill you before the ceremony." Minho was instantly awake, his military training kicking in. "Who? What did you find?" Arya activated the datapad, showing him intercepted communications that made his blood run cold. Lord Zefran and his conservative allies had decided that if they couldn't prevent the marriage through political means, they would eliminate the groom entirely. The plan was elegant in its cruelty: make it look like Minho had suffered an accident during the pre-wedding rituals, then use his death as evidence that humans were too fragile for alliance with the Velaryon Empire. "How did you get these?" Minho asked, already pulling on his clothes and checking his communicator. "Dr. Vela Meth noticed unusual energy patterns in the ship's systems," Arya explained rapidly. "When we investigated, we found hidden surveillance, networks and communication channels that weren't in any official records. They've been planning this for days." A soft sound in the corridor made them both freeze. Footsteps, too quiet and too coordinated to be casual crew members. Minho gestured for silence and moved to the door controls, sealing them in just as the footsteps stopped outside. "Service tunnel," Arya whispered, pointing to a maintenance hatch near the floor. "I studied the ship's blueprints after the trials. There's a network of passages that the cleaning systems use." As they crawled through the narrow tunnels, Minho's mind raced through the tactical situation. How many people are involved in this conspiracy? "At least 12 nobles with significant influence," Arya replied, her voice echoing strangely in the confined space. "But probably more supporters who don't know the full plan. Lord Zefran is telling most of them that they're just going to delay the ceremony, not—" She couldn't finish the sentence. They emerged in the ship's engineering section, where the massive engines hummed with barely contained power. Dr. Vela Meth was waiting for them, his young face pale with fear and determination. "Your Highness?" "Lieutenant Minho," he greeted them with relief. "I've been monitoring their communications. They're planning to make their move during the morning preparation ceremony. A malfunction in the purification chamber that will make it look like an accident." "Can you prove their involvement?" Minho asked, his tactical mind already working on solutions. "That's the problem," Dr. Velameth replied. "They're using old royal communication codes that only high nobles have access to. If we accuse them without absolute proof, it becomes our word against theirs." Arya's eyes lit up with sudden inspiration. "Then we don't accuse them. We make them reveal themselves." Her plan was risky, but brilliant. Instead of trying to stop the assassination attempt, they would let it proceed while secretly recording everything, then broadcast the evidence to the entire fleet simultaneously. But it meant Minho would have to walk into a death trap, trusting that Arya could save him at the crucial moment. "Absolutely not," Minho said immediately. "We find another way." "There is no other way," Arya insisted. "If we just hide, they'll find us eventually. And even if we escape, they'll claim we abandoned our responsibilities. The marriage will be called off, and they'll have won. So we improvise," Minho replied, falling back on human tactical thinking. "We turn their plan against them, but we do it smart." Working together, they developed a counter-strategy that combined Velaryon technology with human cunning. Dr. Vela Meth would create a false malfunction in the purification chamber that looked real, but was actually harmless. Meanwhile, Arya would use her royal access codes to quietly alert loyalist guards to be in position. Minho would play his part, entering the chamber as expected, but wearing hidden recording devices that would capture everything. The most dangerous part was the timing. They had to let the conspirators commit to their plan without actually putting Minho in real danger. It required split-second coordination and absolute trust between species that had known each other for less than a week. As dawn approached, Minho entered the ceremonial preparation chamber, his heart pounding, but his expression calm. The chamber was beautiful, filled with crystalline formations that would purify him before the wedding ceremony. It was also, he now knew, designed to become a death trap. Lord Zephyran himself was present, along with several other nobles, their faces masks of false concern. "Lieutenant Minho," the Lord greeted him with oily politeness, "are you prepared for this momentous day?" "As ready as I can be," Minho replied, activating the hidden recording device with a subtle hand gesture. What followed was a tense few minutes as the nobles went through the motions of the ceremony while secretly preparing their accident. Minho watched their careful movements, noting how they positioned themselves near the exit, how their hands hovered near emergency controls, how their eyes kept checking the time. When Lord Zephyran finally activated what he thought was a lethal system malfunction, nothing happened except a harmless light show that Dr. Velameth had programmed. The confused panic on the conspirators' faces was captured in perfect detail by the recording devices. "Having technical difficulties?" Minho asked innocently, as loyal guards suddenly appeared at every exit, and Princess Arya stepped into the chamber with evidence data pads in hand. The look of defeat on Lord Zephyran's face was almost worth the entire terrifying experience. Later, as the genuine wedding ceremony finally began under the light of the aligned stars, Minho realized that their first real test as partners hadn't been the trials or the politics. It had been learning to trust each other completely in a moment. Without crisis, they had passed that test perfectly. The wedding ceremony took place as 3 stars reached perfect alignment, casting rainbow light through the crystal walls of the Valerian flagship's grand hall. Minho stood at the altar, wearing ceremonial robes that felt both alien and somehow right, watching as Princess Arya approached in traditional Valerian wedding attire that seemed to capture starlight itself. But this wasn't just a wedding anymore. It had become something much larger. Representatives from dozens of alien species had arrived to witness what many were calling the most significant interspecies union in galactic history. The failed assassination attempt had been broadcast across the fleet, and the exposure of Lord Zephyran's conspiracy had sent shockwaves through Valerian society. Emperor Kesitharan himself performed the ceremony, his ancient voice carrying centuries of tradition as he spoke the binding words. But when he reached the part about accepting Minho into the royal bloodline, he paused and looked directly at the human who had somehow passed every trial and survived every challenge. "Lieutenant Minho of Earth," the Emperor said, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall, "you have proven that worth is not measured by the length of one's heritage or the sophistication of one's technology. You have shown us that character transcends species, and that courage comes in many forms." As they exchanged vows, Minho caught sight of familiar faces in the crowd. Commander Ji-won and Dr. Kim had arrived from Lunar Station, along with a delegation from Earth that included some very nervous politicians who were still trying to figure out if this whole situation was a diplomatic triumph or disaster. "I promise to learn from your people," Minho said during his vows, while never forgetting the lessons my own people taught me. "Together, we'll build something new." Princess Arya's response brought tears to eyes throughout the hall. "I promise to help my people remember what we've forgotten, that growth requires change, that strength comes from diversity, and that the future belongs to those brave enough to embrace it." When the ceremony concluded, and they were officially declared bonded for life, something unprecedented happened. Young Valarians throughout the fleet began requesting transfers to work with human crews. Dr. Velameth approached Commander Ji-won with proposals for joint research projects. Even some of the older nobles, the ones who hadn't been part of Lord Zephyran's conspiracy, began quietly asking about establishing cultural exchange programs. The wedding reception was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Human and Valerian crew members shared stories, compared technologies, and discovered that despite their vast differences, they had remarkably similar hopes and dreams. Earth's music mixed with Valerian harmonics in ways that neither species had imagined possible. Dr. Kim found himself surrounded by Valerian scientists eager to learn about human problem-solving methods. "How you approach challenges so differently," one young researcher explained excitedly. "Where we see obstacles, you see opportunities. Where we calculate risks, you calculate possibilities. Meanwhile, human crew members were amazed by Valerian achievements in energy manipulation and space travel. But more than the technology, they were fascinated by the Valerian capacity for patience and long-term thinking, qualities that could help humanity avoid some of its more impulsive mistakes. 6 months. Later, the changes were impossible to ignore. The first human-Valerian joint colony had been established on a frontier world, combining human adaptability with Valerian engineering expertise. Earth's universities were hosting Valerian exchange students, while human artists and musicians were revolutionizing creative expression throughout the Valerian Empire. But perhaps the most significant change was in how other alien species began viewing humanity. Word had spread throughout the galaxy about the humans, who had earned respect not through conquest or intimidation, but through courage, creativity, and an unwillingness to compromise their principles for personal gain. Ambassador Tichel of the Quantum Collective arrived at Earth 6 months after the wedding with an interesting proposal. "We've been watching your species since the Valerian incident," she explained to the assembled world leaders. "Your people possess something rare in the galaxy, the ability to inspire positive change in others. We'd like to discuss humanity, joining the Galactic Council, not as junior members but as cultural ambassadors." Minho and Arya, now serving as co-directors of the new Interspecies Cooperation Initiative, received the news while working on their latest project, a plan to help the rigid crystalline hegemony rediscover the innovation they'd lost centuries ago. "Do you ever regret it?" Arya asked him one evening as they watched Earth's sunset from their home in Geneva. "The simple life you gave up when you accepted that pendant?" Minho looked at his wife, then at the reports scattered around their table, detailing successful integration projects across a dozen worlds. "I gave up a simple life," he agreed, "but I gained something extraordinary. We're not just married. We're proof that different doesn't mean incompatible. We're living evidence that the galaxy is big enough for all of us to grow together." The little pendant that had started it all sat in a place of honor on their mantelpiece, no longer a symbol of diplomatic accident, but of possibility itself. Sometimes the most important journeys begin with a single, unexpected step, and sometimes the future of two civilizations can hinge on one person's willingness to say yes to the impossible.